Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2023 edition of the Roger Watts Debate, hosted by the Department of Economics, Philosophy, and Political Science within the Irving K. Barber Faculty of Arts and Social Science. My name is Jeffrey Sigalet. I'm an assistant professor of political science here at UBCO, and it's my pleasure to serve as your MC tonight. Before I reveal the resolution and talk about the rules for the debate and the schedule for the debate, and introduce our judges and debaters here, it's my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Irving K. Barber Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Sylvia Tomaszkova. In addition to being the Dean of the faculty, Dr. Tomaszkova is a professor of anthropology and gender studies here at UBCO. She is a feminist anthropologist, an archaeologist who has conducted research in Eastern and Central Europe, Siberia, and in South Africa. Dr. Tomaszkova is interested in knowledge production, particularly about places and spaces in the deep past as alternatives to modernity. Before coming to UBCO, she taught at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So, without further ado.
Thank you, Jeff. And good evening, everyone. Welcome on this very lovely afternoon. But before we begin this evening's proceedings, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their peoples, in whose traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of these lands. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight for the Roger Watts Debate. This debate provides us with the opportunity to showcase our undergraduate students to the community. It is on this stage that they will come together to deliver compelling debates on Canada's affordability crisis and whether it justifies a temporary wealth tax. In a time of polarization, this event truly reinforces the importance of debate. It is vital, now more than ever, to conduct civil conversation that consider various opinions and experiences when discussing difficult subject matters. The art of debate involves skills of obvious value that we in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences teach in just about every class. The confidence to speak in public, to make sense, the construction of a logical argument, the ability to read an audience's reactions, and perhaps most importantly, the willingness to hear others' arguments and to respond to them, while at times improvising on the spot. For those who are attending this event for the first time, the Roger Watts Debate was created in memory of Roger Watts by his family, his colleagues, and community, and is made possible with the partnership with UBCO. Roger received his bachelor and law degrees from UBC and was called to the bar in 1975. He practiced law in the Okanagan for 35 years. His practice allowed him the opportunity to represent both plaintiff cases, fighting passionately on the client's behalf against administration, rules, and the system, and defense cases where he fought for our province's only insurer, ICBC. He argued each case with equal passion and commitment, regardless of whether he was representing the individual or the big corporation. He had all the traits of a good debater. Roger loved to teach and mentored many students who aspired to be trial lawyers. He spoke about the powers of advocacy as a guest lecturer on contemporary Canadian law in the Political Science Department at UBCO. It is very fitting that an endowment fund set up in his memory now supports young advocates of the future. Before I close, I would like to acknowledge the incredible contributions from our organizers and supporters. First, I would like to recognize the efforts of our incredible UBC Okanagan Debate Society. a non-competitive group of students who meet weekly to practice the art of debate. Welcoming students from any faculty, the Debate Society gives students of all abilities a fun way to develop their oracy skills, and the annual Roger Watts Debate competition allows the students to demonstrate the skills they have developed and to debate in front of a community audience. Without the debate club, there would be no Roger Watts Debate. I also would like to thank the organizing committee, particularly Julianne Picot, Renaud Philippe Garner, and Jeff Siglet, with the administrative and communicative support of Sue-Ann Brown, Lindsay Howe, Liana Knesevitz, Marisa Liebel, Peter Uni, and Perla Villegas Diaz, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes and have been instrumental in ensuring the 10th annual Roger Watts Debate is the best one yet. And finally, the Roger Watts Debate is made possible through the generous continued support of the Watts family and Wally Lightbody KC. I thank each of you for your ongoing support of this important student experience event. And with that, I will pass it back to Jeff and look forward to hearing from our excellent debaters. Good luck to each and every one of you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Dean Tomaszkova. The Roger Watts Debate is one of the Department of Economics, Philosophy, and Political Science's signature community events. And so without any other commentary, we'll turn towards the question for today. Today, the debaters will argue their case on the following question. Be it resolved that Canada's affordability crisis justifies a temporary wealth tax. So now that we know the question that we'll be debating today, let's get familiar with the rules and the schedule for the event. The Watts Debate follows the format of a parliamentary form of debate, with members of each team alternating with opponents and allocated to certain time limits. Note that students have been assigned each role, and their opinions that they express here today in this debate are not necessarily their own. Today's moderator, Julianne Picot, professor in the Department of Economics, my colleague, he may choose to intervene at certain points if he feels that a debater requires another minute to conclude a point, to stop a debater if they have gone on too long, or if the open debate requires more time for adequate rebuttal, or if any debater defies the standard of Parliament either by unduly personalizing the debate or using unfortunate, or what we call unparliamentary language. No fuddle-duddles. No. Students in my federalism class know what that means. Julian will be assisted in his task by our timekeeper, Lakshay Cornwall, who was the winner of the 2021 Watts Debate. The schedule will goes as follows. First, the Prime Minister will have a 5-minute opening. Then the Leader of the Opposition will have a 5-minute response. Then the Deputy Prime Minister will have an 8-minute response. Then we'll turn to a rapid-fire round, where there's 8 minutes of rapid-fire back and forth. Then, concluding, the Leader of the Opposition will have 3 minutes to issue a closing statement, and the Prime Minister will have the last word with a 3-minute closing statement. So now that we have a better idea of the rules and the schedule, let's get to meeting our student debaters here. So representing the government side here is Braden Gervais as our Prime Minister. And Ayo Maxwell as Deputy Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister, Braden Gervais, is from Maple Ridge, British Columbia. He won the Watts Debate twice before and is the president of the UBCO Debate Society and the UBCO...
Was president.
Was president of the UBCO Debate Society. Sorry, Trinity is the current president of the UBC Debate Society. That is my fault. And Braden is also the president of the UBCO Runnymede Society. He would like to continue with his education, and after his undergraduate degree, he is considering several different potential law schools to attend. And just waiting to make his final decision. Every time I see him, I ask him what it's going to be. Our Deputy Prime Minister, Io Maxwell, is a third-year psychology major at UBCO, originally from London, England, by way of also by way of Alberta. He is engaged with Model UN, pre-law, and our Black Excellence Society, and will be starting next year at the Peter Allard UBC Faculty of Law. On the opposition side, His Majesty's loyal opposition over here, we have Chanidou Gamage as our leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, and Trinity Schreidel as the deputy leader of the opposition. Our leader of the opposition, Chanidou Gamage, is proudly from Nova Scotia. I know he'd like it if I said proudly. He's a fourth-year philosophy and political science major. He serves on the Campaign Life Coalition's Youth Executive Committee and is an intern at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's published in the Wall Street Journal, something I wish I could say, and Israel Hayom and the Jewish News Syndicate. Our deputy opposition leader, Trinity Schreidel, is from West Kelowna and is a fourth-year political science major here at UBCO. She will be attending TRU Law School next year, and when she isn't working at FHP Lawyers, she enjoys coaching and playing soccer, hiking, and going for long-distance runs. So give our opposition a hand. So, prize money. What are they competing for? The prizes for tonight's event are $1,000 to be awarded to the first place finishers, while prizes of $500 will be awarded to the runners-up. Let's meet our judges, who very graciously volunteered their time, even if they're hiding from me in the front row. Our first judge is Mike Donison. Mike, do you want to stand up? Give Mike a hand. Mike is a retired lawyer and former general manager at Crestview Strategies Incorporated, a public relations firm in Ottawa. He's had an amazing career with highlights including being the former senior advisor for legislative review and democratic reform to the House Leader of the House of Commons. That's a mouthful of a title, but it's pretty impressive. And former executive director of the Conservative Party of Canada. Our second judge, Milia Morehouse. Milia, do you want to stand up and take a hand? Milia practices in the areas of civil and commercial litigation and has assisted clients with a broad range of disputes, including property, contract, construction, and business disputes. She is an alumna of UBCO's Politics, Philosophy, and Economics program and earned her JD at Dalhousie. Our third judge is Elvia Pico. Elvia has an extensive background in public relations, corporate community investments, event management, and fund development. She is a published author and photographer who writes about business, health, and lifestyles, while also teaching business communications to international students and tutoring in literacy programs. Now that we clapped at the beginning and end of each judge, we have to do it for everybody. Our fourth judge is Christopher Walker. I believe he's our judge who needs the least introduction. He is a journalist and host with CBC based here in Kelowna, who works covering the Okanagan and the Kootenays. A veteran broadcaster, he's covered the BC Interior for almost 20 years and has won multiple regional and national journalism awards for his feature reporting. Chris is best known for his engaging interviews on the popular morning program Daybreak South. I know that he's one of our better known judges because my grandmother told me she heard him talking about our show this morning. Our fifth judge is Wendy Thiessen. Wendy is a civil and commercial litigation lawyer with Rush Ihaz Hardwick, LLP. Prior to moving to Kelowna from Edmonton in 2016, Wendy practiced in civil and commercial litigation at a mid-sized Edmonton firm, and then served as counsel to the Department of Environment with the Government of Alberta. She graduated with a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Alberta in 2008, achieving the second highest rank in her class to earn the silver medalist position. She then clerked at the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, as it was then known. So that's it. Without further ado, let's turn to the debate portion of the event. To begin, please welcome our Prime Minister, Braden Gervais, for his opening remarks.
Thank you for having me. Before we begin the actual debate, we have to define the terms of the motion. The motion is, be it resolved, that Canada's affordability crisis justifies a temporary wealth tax. We define affordability crisis as a general and sustained significant price spike in the cost of necessities like food, housing, and energy. We define justify as showing an action to be reasonable. In other words, to defend this motion, we must show that a wealth tax is a reasonable response to the affordability crisis Canada is facing, which we will do. We define temporary as lasting for a limited period. To ensure policy predictability, we will only impose a wealth tax for 3 years. And lastly, we define a wealth tax as a government financial charge requiring direct or indirect funding of public expenditures, such as the building of affordable housing based on the net worth of families. The affordability crisis in this country is real and pressing. Pre-existing problems like unaffordable housing have been compounded with issues of inflation and supply chain issues to the point that the rising cost of living experienced across Canada is threatening to seriously harm and destabilize our communities. Unfortunately, fixing big problems does not come free. That's why our government supports the resolution put forward that this affordability crisis justifies a temporary wealth tax. First, I as Prime Minister will go over the details of our proposed wealth tax, and then the government together will lay out its 3 main arguments in favor of the motion. 1, that it promotes social stability. 2, that it is fair. And lastly, that it will target the root causes of housing affordability issues. Our wealth tax will apply a rate of 1% on net worth above $20 million. Net worth would be calculated as a household sum of assets minus its liabilities. Revenue from this tax would be placed into the Canadian Affordability Fund, where spending would be legally restricted to 4 key areas of social investment: housing, transit, home energy, and affordable food. Our goal is more social investment, not more tax revenue. That is why our governments will be spending the money in a restricted way, and furthermore, we will introduce a social investment credit that will allow those subject to the wealth tax to deduct from their tax payment approved social investment. For example, rather than paying the wealth tax, an individual or group of individuals may want to help invest in partnership with the government in affordable housing. Or they might want to buy into existing social impact bonds to help programs like Meals on Wheels serve even more hungry individuals, or RAFT and Mainstay Housing in Ontario help the homeless. The nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Office estimates, assuming for big behavioral responses, that a wealth tax of this kind will produce almost $6 billion in new social investment. The CCPA, one of our leading think tanks, estimates that it could earn in over $10 billion of social investment. In the end, this is not a tax designed to permanently fill the pockets of government, but one that is temporary and tailored to the problem of solving this affordability crisis. This is a justified policy. The affordability crisis is a serious threat to Canadian stability. This is not rhetoric, this is real. Recent polling paints a stark picture of anger in this country. When asked about the Canadian economy, merely 10% of Canadians answered positively. When asked about the types of change happening in Canada, 9% answered positively. For a clear picture of the social harm that a crisis like this can cause, look no further than the Yellow Vest protests in France. 3 million people have participated in these protests, and sometimes there's even been major rioting. What precipitated this crisis? The repeal of a wealth tax in France and the increasing of fuel taxes. COVID was a very expensive time, and the French government decided that the burden should be laid upon the middle class and the working class rather than the wealthiest who were able to afford it. And they didn't appreciate that burden being laid on them. This is an issue that if we allow to fester, so we do nothing to try to deal with this affordability crisis, we will see homelessness, we will see social decay, we will see growing social problems. We will see more tent cities, things like this that have affected our communities. If we decide that we are going to reach into the pockets of the middle class and the working class rather than the wealthiest, we will breed animosity, discontent, anger, and more social instability. Our tailored and temporary wealth tax is a justified policy, and that's why I'm very proud to approve this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. The government made a beautiful explanation of why we're in a serious affordability crisis in this country, and we agree that we need to do a lot about it. The question at hand today is whether affordability crisis justifies a temporary wealth tax. The key word is justifies. Does affordability crisis logically mean we need a wealth tax? The government has to show why affordability crisis equals wealth tax. On this side of the bench, we say, heck no. And we're going to prove that with two main arguments. The first is the economic argument, that this will cripple our nation and hurt the very people that it's meant to help. And secondly, it's going to be a social issue. This wealth tax will tear our country apart and cause even more social issues between the nation. So let's get into it. Now, let's take a look back at other countries who tried a wealth tax. 10 out of 14 OECD countries have tried a wealth tax. 14 countries, and 10 have completely abandoned them because they've completely and utterly failed. If I came home to my parents and said, I'm going to make a huge financial decision, and 10 out of 14 times it hasn't worked, my mom would slap me in the face. Second, wealth is difficult to define. Now, will this include cars, homes, investments in various stocks and bonds? It's difficult. Furthermore, assets can easily be moved out of the country. What we don't want to see is a huge burdensome wealth tax on the investors and entrepreneurs in our country, and then moving their capital out of the country overseas. Additionally, Canada is an equitable country. We already do impose a progressive tax system on the wealthy. We're not an unfair nation. We do help the poor, and we do charge the wealthy adequately. Therefore, with the existing progressive tax system that's already very high on the wealthy, the government will either have to propose a tax so modest that it will not make a difference in revenue, or they'll have to make it punitive to the point that it's way too high and people will leave the country and bring all of their resources with them. We're also very concerned about tax evasion. The wealthy are powerful, they have connections, and they can easily take their money out of the tax system and using loopholes and out of the country as well, overseas. We're also concerned about the macro negative economic impacts this will have. Firstly, a decrease in innovation. If people are being punished for making above $20 million, it'll be very difficult to innovate and make goods and services that we need in this country to make our lifestyles more affordable and easier to live. It'll also decrease capital investments that are necessary to raise the living standards that people are suffering through. We want foreign money to come into our country. We want investments, we want to build, and we want to help the poor through lifting them up, not pushing other people down. The government's proposing a blunt instrument that addresses none of the root issues and will merely put a Band-Aid on the problem. Canada is facing a severe cancer. We are very sick and hurting in this country. And the government wants to drop an atomic bomb on a suffering cancer patient. And my partner is going to speak about the specific social issues that we need to address.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This country is facing a crisis. Government is choosing action, side opposition is choosing inaction. Government is trying to make those who pay for it, those who can afford it, while side opposition is trying to make those who pay for it, those who can't. Let me break down my argument into 3 key parts. First, I'm going to give a rebuttal to the side opposition's arguments, mainly focusing on how they say this tax will cause social unrest and how a capital will be moved outside of the country. Then I'll move on to my arguments about how this promotes fairness, and lastly about how we can alleviate some of the housing affordability concerns our citizens face. So first, side opposition tells you this tale about how our millionaires are going to flap their wings and fly away. But there are actually methods we can put in place to stop this. For example, one of these is an exit tax, where if an individual tries to move all their capital outside of the country, they get served with a larger tax to disincentivize them from doing such. There are also previous examples. One of the failed wealth tax systems was in France. But guess what? A lot of the individuals that engaged in capital flight actually moved to other countries that have wealth taxes. This shows that they weren't trying to escape a wealth tax as much as they were trying to escape France's bad wealth tax. Side opposition talks about how wealth taxes failed 10 out of 14 times, but doesn't consider that the way the wealth tax was implemented counts. And we're not implementing our wealth tax like the 10 countries, we're implementing our wealth tax like the other 4. Now, moving on to how they say this was unpopular. First, let me explain how this tax would actually be very popular. 79% of Canadians actually have polled in favor, either in favor or strongly in favor of a tax of this kind. In addition, this tax, the support for this tax, slashes through party lines with 64% of Conservatives, 86% of Liberals, and 87% of New Democrats supporting such a tax. Now let me move on to my main arguments. We need money to alleviate this affordability crisis, and that money has to come from somewhere. We can get it from debt that will most likely be paid by the middle and working class in future taxes. We can get it by taxing the working and middle class who are already suffering and barely able to afford necessities, or we can put new taxes on the wealthiest individuals in Canada. Let me remind you that during the pandemic, it was actually the rich that benefited. As explained by Francisco Ferreira from the London School of Economics, governments pumped trillions of dollars into financial markets that led to a dramatic rise in asset prices, including stocks, which benefited the very richest. Overall, during the pandemic, Canadian billionaires saw growth of their wealth of 51%. And over the last decade, for every $100 of Canadian wealth that was generated, 34 of that went to Canada's richest few. And can you guess how much went to the lowest 50% of Canadians? Only 5. In other words, the rich benefited off the suffering backs of the working and middle class. While some of you in the audience may have been sick at home, unable to work, the government was pumping trillions of dollars into the pockets of millionaires and billionaires nationwide, just in hopes of encouraging companies to invest in the economy. It is only fair to now give the working and middle class some of the aid they missed out on as they were faced not only with COVID-19, but now also with the affordability crisis. In essence, the rich are only paying back for the growth they received during the pandemic simply by making the country livable for average Canadians. And moving on to the housing affordability argument, the biggest affordability issue affecting Canadians today is housing. In 2022, the cost for an average family to keep a roof over their head is up to 63% of their income. 4 of the 5 most expensive housing markets in North America are in Canada, and lastly, Toronto and Vancouver average house prices over $1 million. Renters do not fare much better either. There's a reason why in 2019, almost all of Canada's 25 largest cities have seen major house encampments in public areas, just like Tent City and downtown Kelowna. Many middle-class individuals can't even afford homes. They then join the rental market, they then cause rent prices to increase, and then push more families to be unable to rent houses. One of the big root causes for the affordability issue in Canada has been house and land speculation. Research from RBC, Harvard, Princeton, just to name a few, show that speculation has been dramatically increasing house prices. And to explain this, let me give you an example. We have our friend John, who's a real estate developer. He's bought several plots of land and houses just for the purpose of letting them sit, coming back a few years later, a few decades later, and selling them for higher costs. No one is living on this land. No one's living in these houses, but it's an easy investment. In other words, this is an economic asset being bought up by the rich, inefficiently used, profit generated for them, and then who pays that profit? The working and middle class. With our system, a wealth tax could incentivize investors like John to construct on purchased land to increase their profits. Part of our wealth tax even includes social credits, which would be an incentive for John not only to build housing on that land, but to build high-density housing on that land. That way, he would be reimbursed for increasing the supply of housing to Canadians, thus driving down the price and making Canada a more affordable place to live. Even in this situation, John still earns money on investment, but now he also contributes to solving the affordability crisis facing everyday Canadians like you and I. To conclude, this country is facing a crisis, and the government is choosing action, and side opposition is choosing inaction. Government is choosing to make those who pay those who can afford it. Side opposition is choosing to make those who pay those who can't. Government wants to provide you with affordable housing, whilst side opposition wants you to live in tent city. And lastly, government sympathizes with the trials and turmoils the working class has faced, while side opposition says, let them eat cake. Thank you very much.
I'm good. Thank you. We live in a decidedly imperfect world. There is poverty, there are drug epidemics, and there is pollution. Unfortunately, that is not the fault of a small group of people. We can't just target this group of people and all of a sudden the problem is gone. This is a social issue. The government is proposing a temporary fix for a very social issue. That's why we're here today, a wealth tax. I will spend my time here with you, showing why a temporary wealth tax is not only not justified, but would have a very negative impact on all of our lives, not just the wealthy. I will firstly respond to the government's argument that the housing affordability crisis will be resolved using a wealth tax. Totally disagree with this. I'll get to that. Then I'll argue that the proposed motion is firstly not necessitated by the crisis at the moment, and it's putting a Band-Aid on a social issue. So firstly, the government said a lot. They have told you that we are against the poor. We are for the rich. We are going to hurt the middle class. We're going to hurt the working class. I need you to throw that out the window. You've heard a lot of words. You've heard a lot of statistics. That's not the real thing. The real thing is that firstly, the reason why so many countries get rid of their wealth taxes is because they don't generate the revenue that they suspect they will. They're not reasonable. Secondly, the issue is not going to be solved by taxing the wealthy and putting that into, they're suggesting a kind of a weird co-argument. They're suggesting that they're going to take money away from the wealthy. They're going to make them pay back what they propose that they gained during COVID. But at the same time, they're also proposing that this wealth tax is going to help them. In fact, what they're proposing is that a wealth tax is going to tax the wealthy in a way that they're not going to like. And if they don't like the wealth tax and decide to use that money on social initiatives, then they're not going to like that either. You have either an option of being taxed or going into specific social initiatives. That's not what we need. The affordability crisis is a very nuanced and social issue. What the government is missing is that there's a supply and demand crisis. Right now we have too much demand and we need to focus on the supply aspect. So I want to talk about the people involved. So we have the impoverished, and these are the people at the very bottom who I would suspect would be hurting most in the affordability crisis. I think that makes sense. So these people include unattached individuals, people with disabilities, children, recent immigrants, First Nations people. Between 2015 and 2018, this group actually decreased, which is great. On the other hand, we have the wealthy. Obviously, the wealthy have a little bit more and they should be giving back. And that's why in Canada we have a progressive taxation system. We're already taxing the wealthy more. We don't need an additional wealth tax on this. We have a progressive system so the people at the bottom don't pay the same as people at the top. Moreover, because of this, we have to look at how an affordability crisis works. So an interesting thing about the income inequality in Canada is that it's connected to recession. So when we go through something like we did in COVID, and our economy suffers, the things become less affordable because people don't have jobs. To fix that, we need to create more jobs. By taking money from the wealthy and putting it into specific social initiatives, you are restricting the way that people can produce new, innovative ideas. That's what we need. We can't keep doing the same thing. We need to give the man a fishing pole rather than a fish. We need to focus on the things that the people at the very bottom actually want. We need to focus on giving agency and choice to people. We need to focus on creating safe and inclusive supports. We need to focus on education. We need to focus on childcare. And we need to focus on employment. The government is focusing on the housing crisis. The government is focusing on these things that are not the root cause of it. The root cause is that we have a society that doesn't support the people at the very bottom, and we need to fix that. And the way isn't adding more money into the system, it's rearranging how we spend that money. During COVID-19, we had an emergency benefit. So people who lost their jobs could take this rather than unemployment insurance. Unfortunately, after the pandemic, everyone's required to pay this back. The government's in debt, very severely in debt now. And they're using more taxes to try and get this debt back. Unfortunately, it's not working. We need to think of new, innovative ideas rather than doing the same thing that we've always done. And a wealth tax is not the right idea. The government is saying that the way we implement a wealth tax would be different. It would be new. I'm pretty sure every country says that. If we implement a wealth tax, it will be the wrong thing that this country needs. We already have a progressive tax system. We can use that. We have the money. We just need to reconfigure how we're using this. And implementing a wealth tax would cripple the economy. Who is supporting the economy? Who are the entrepreneurs? Who would be scared off by this measure? And moreover, you're not considering that not everyone who has this type of money that you're taxing is an entrepreneur. You're taxing all of a sudden the wealthy. How is this impacting everyone's ability to retire, have savings? Does this mean that we shouldn't, aspire to do that because we're just going to hit a wall and all of a sudden give it back? You're going to hear a lot of statistics today. You're going to hear that we're against the poor man, against the working man. We reject that. The government is not addressing a social issue. They're trying to add more money onto a money problem that can be fixed by reevaluating how we're using that money. Thank you.
So the opposition talked about Canada as having social problems, which we agreed with. They talk about Canada as being sick, but all they want to do is argue and complain about the hospital bill. Let's be adults here. How do we help someone if we're not willing to pay their medical bills? How does the opposition suggest that we pay these medical bills? If we don't tax the rich, do they want to tax the middle class?
Can I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So there's other options, and clearly, you would know about them. Instead of paying for everyone's medical bill, instead of implementing a wealth tax, why don't we allow private clinics? There's other European countries that have universal health care, but also have other ways.
The sickness is a metaphor. We're not talking about health care.
You just brought up health care. We are talking about health care, are we not?
He said the country was sick. That was the metaphor.
Yeah, and then you started talking about health care. What was your...
Again, metaphorically.
Metaphorically. So what was your real...
My real point is, how do you pay to deal with this crisis?
There's other ways, is what I'm telling you.
The answer isn't, is this the only way? It's, does this justify? Is it reasonable? Is this a good way of dealing with it?
Well, I'm saying it's not the reasonable way. There's other ways that are more reasonable.
Like what?
Like reconfiguring how our social system uses that taxing. Like for healthcare, our metaphor that we just had.
Sure.
Why are we doing it so linearly? Why can't we have a system that is private and a public one? Why don't we have both? There are other ways than just taxing the rich.
You want to take money from the healthcare system, is what you're saying?
No, we can keep the money in the healthcare system.
You just said reconfigure. If it's all in the healthcare system, how are we helping people afford housing?
Metaphor again, but there's other ways. I'm showing you that there's more than one path, and we're not here to tell you that we have this brand new solution because yours doesn't work.
Solution.
Your solution doesn't work.
Does work.
The government's defined temporary as 3 years. What a crazy definition. What happens after 3 years if the problem's not solved? Are you going to continue it endlessly?
No, we're not going to continue it endlessly. But the issue, what we're talking about here is the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, an organization of Parliament, says that this can raise $6 billion a year.
Okay.
That's $18 billion of new investment into affordable housing.
What if life's
into Meals and
expensive in
Wheels
3
for
years?
seniors, into converting oil to heat pumps, which saves people on average $1,500 to $4,700 a year on home heating.
Okay, but you suggested that this money's going into social programs, right?
Social investment.
Social investment. Okay, so you're limiting what that we can use that on, aren't you?
Yes, you said we need to reconfigure it and how we use the money. We're not only reconfiguring how we use the money, but we're
No,
also
you're just adding more money onto the problem,
But
right?
we're also reconfiguring how we
And
use
moreover, you're looking for a fast and easy solution like this, like weight loss. This isn't a diet. You can't do it in 1 day. 3 years is not enough time, A, to fix the issue, and B, we don't need a wealth tax. We have a progressive system of taxation already. You can use that money if you
already
use it
have a
differently.
good tax, then why are we having this affordability crisis? If your progressive tax is so
Because there's social issues. You just said that there's social issues.
People are tired of they're having to pay for the crisis while other people aren't.
But we have a progressive taxation system, so everyone is
That's not
paying.
currently working enough to stop the affordability
But adding
crisis.
another tax onto a tax system that you admit is not working is going to work?
Yes.
It will raise
Okay,
revenue.
why?
It's been shown to raise revenue.
If you want to raise revenue, why not a VAT tax? Why not a tariff? Why a wealth tax?
The question isn't, are there other options? The question is it reasonable?
Well, you just asked me at the beginning of this if there was other options.
Does it wealth justify a wealth tax?
But also
Why a
that
wealth tax?
targets the poor way more than it targets anyone else. They're the ones that have to buy goods in stores.
So why not things like a luxury tax? Why are we doing a wealth tax?
So
why
why
are
do you
we...
support a luxury tax?
Sorry?
You've complained about the wealth tax, you said it's going to drive all these people out, which is not true. Norway, Switzerland have tens of billions of dollars of capital flowing inwards. They've had wealth taxes since the 1800s. You mentioned a luxury tax. Why do you support a luxury tax if you're afraid of the rich flying?
I would say the wealth tax would be, you can pick which luxury goods you want. Everyone has the option. It's like...
It's like what?
It's like what? What?
No, you said it was like something. You didn't
Yeah,
finish.
and then you cut me off. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
So we have a luxury tax, which you can choose, and a wealth tax, which you can't. You're just taxing based not on people's choices. You're choosing it based off
on
a
their
number.
means, on their
You're
means,
turning
their ability
people
to
into a
afford
number.
to pay the tax. $20 million is a lot of money. I don't think I'm ever going to get $20 million. I really hope I do, and then I can pay this wealth tax if there's an affordability crisis.
Okay, but what I'm telling you is that we already have a progressive taxation system, so that when you get to that amount of money, don't worry, you will be paying taxes. I'm saying that instead of implementing a wealth tax, which would take money away from entrepreneurs who can use that money to do new and innovative ideas.
Who's working for these entrepreneurs, by the way?
Who's what?
Who's working for these entrepreneurs?
People without
Who's creating
jobs?
the products that they
No,
need
they
to
have
sell?
jobs.
Exactly. The people, the
If
working
they
class.
will,
have to
when
support the
entrepreneurs
working
get a
class,
chance.
how are they going to be able to come up with these new ideas and produce these products and services? You talk about how we need to create more jobs in education, but how are we going to have new jobs in education? when
How are
people
we
can
going to
barely
create new
afford
jobs
food
in
to eat?
education
What's the
without
point of
innovators
being
making
educated
new
if you
jobs in
can't
education?
afford a house? What's the point of being educated and having a job if you can't afford to eat?
What's the point of, doing an education so that you can afford to eat? Because increasingly right now,
You
you
would be able to
cannot
eat, I
get a
think.
So I'm
job that
supposed to
pays
study
enough.
without eating is what you're telling me.
The people in these jobs are the working class. You're punishing
Yeah.
the factory owner whose investment goes into their paychecks,
No.
that pays for the food, and it's going to hurt them.
It's
Can
not
I
going to
ask you,
hurt them
government,
as much
why,
as them
if you're
not
so
being able-
concerned
You have
about
to-
the working
we're-
class, why are we not making things like education more affordable? Why are we
Well, how do
going
you make
straight
it more
to a wealth
affordable if
tax?
you're not getting that money from somewhere?
We have the money.
We don't have the money. Where is the investment? If we have the money, where is the investment?
Invest in our future. Invest in
No, we
education.
want to invest in the future, but we need the money to do that.
We
Why
have
a
a
wealth
progressive
tax?
taxation system.
Wealth tax will work. It's as simple as
As
that.
I
You
actually
raise
outlined-
You
revenue.
have
in
not,
my own
government,
art-
you have not proved that a wealth tax will work. You have told us that we need more
the
money.
PBO
You
has,
have
the
not
CCPA
actually shown
has.
that a wealth tax is the way. There are other ways.
It's
A luxury
way.
tax. Why is
No,
a luxury
it's a way.
tax?
We're not debating if it's the only way. Again, if it's a way, justifies.
not
Why
a
does it
reasonable
justify
way.
the wealth tax?
What?
Whether it justifies the wealth tax. It may be a way, but why does it justify the wealth tax
Because
specifically?
it's a way. You just said it's a way.
But
If
it's
it's
a
a way,
very
it's
poor way.
justified.
It's an
There
unreasonable
has to
way
be
because every other
a
country
rational-
that implements it,
Because out-
it doesn't work.
No, it's incorrect.
You said 10 out of 14, did you
Switzerland-
not? Did you not say
Switzerland-
10 out of
Just a second.
14 countries that didn't work?
Okay,
I
but-
think there's
but
some
Switzerland
countries
didn't
10
work.
out of 14, it didn't
It
work.
did not work.
Yes,
Switzerland-
and
just
there are
like-
other countries where it did work, yes or no?
Yeah,
And you're going to be
4 of them.
different. You're going to be the 1%.
Well,
Yeah, as I actually said with my own argument, the reason why it's justified is because what
Can
are
I
other
suggest
options?
that, too, these
are we
4
going to get more
countries where it
debt?
did work
Are we
in a
going to
very
tax the
different
people
way
who
that
can
they
barely
use these
afford
funds to
necessities?
support
What else are
social
you going to do?
programs?
What was that? What was the question?
My point was that I've already explained why this is justified, because it is the best out of our current options. Are we going to tax the individuals that can barely afford necessities? Are we going to get more debt and then tax people in the future? Or are we going to continue to use our wonderful progressive tax system that has us in this affordability crisis in the first place?
Well, there's many ways to get revenue. We can borrow. We need money now. We can borrow money to invest in the economy. What happens if the country comes back to you in 3 years and nothing's worked and it's crippled the economy? What then?
That's it for the rapid fire round. Thank you very much.
We were here today to discuss whether the affordability crisis justifies a temporary wealth tax. And the government has not shown that the affordability crisis justifies a wealth tax, whether affordability crisis means wealth tax. They've said it's a very serious problem. We need revenue. If we need revenue, why not other forms of taxation? Why not borrowing? Why not other forms of making money? Why a wealth tax that has so many problems, failed so many times, utterly crippled other nations? Why would you institute a wealth tax? Why would an affordability crisis mean a wealth tax? The government also said this is enormously popular, that the Canadians will love this and they'll be flocking to the voting booths to vote for this. But that's not true. In 2021, the Green Party and the New Democratic Party both proposed a wealth tax. And both of their numbers went down in the polls. They did not get the support that the government is promising. This will not be popular amongst Canadians. When we try to point out some of the severe and damaging impacts of the wealth tax that Canadians are well aware of, the government says, we won't be like other nations, we'll be special, no one believes you. And thirdly, a temporary wealth tax, they've explained it as being for 3 years and that's done. Why would it be 3 years? Why would it not be when the affordability crisis has been solved? What happens at the end of 3 years when it is still an affordability crisis? If we're trying to say that the affordability crisis justifies a wealth tax, we would think that the wealth tax is helping the affordability crisis. So why 3 years? What if it's solved in 2 years? What if it takes 10 years? Will it just be an infinite wealth tax? This is not a conservative liberal debate. We all agree that we need reforms, we need to spend money, and we need to put that into social programs and to help the poor. But once again, the government is trying to put an atomic bomb on this country of the wealth tax that Canadians don't want and it's failed across the globe. We have control over industrial policy and over regulatory policy. If they need revenue, there's a myriad of other ways to raise money. They have to prove why the wealth tax is justified, and they haven't done that. We've shown that it will cripple our economy. My partner's amazingly shown that it will rip this country apart. We're divided after years of COVID. After years of COVID, the country's divided. We saw a trucker convoy in Ottawa, residential schools tearing this country apart, and we saw churches being burnt down across Western Canada. This country is dying, and the government wants to drop an atomic bomb on us. Thank you.
Prime Minister, you may proceed with your concluding remarks.
Perfect. Thank you. So the opposition said a couple things there that I'd like to kind of go into before I get to my concluding remarks. They talked about using the current tax system. Well, one of the reasons we're avoiding using the current tax system is it currently targets the middle class and lower income earners the most. They're the biggest taxpayers. We don't want debt, because who's going to pay for that? The middle class and lower class. They always have. They talk about all these social problems that we're not dealing with. We're talking about an affordability crisis. They're talking about healthcare, education. People don't want a degree if they can't afford a home. We need to be able to house people. We need to be able to feed people. They've talked about all these failures, but they failed to mention that countries like France were horribly mismanaged before they put the wealth tax in, where countries like Norway and Switzerland have had these wealth taxes since the 1800s and have been economically dynamic. Tens of billions of dollars of new capital go into those countries every year. The government's burden in this debate has been to justify the uses of wealth tax of helping to deal with the affordability crisis. Not to prove that this is the only solution, not that it is a silver bullet here to fix everything completely, merely that it is a means that is rationally connected to the objective of providing some level of relief to this crisis. Simply that it is good enough to begin helping. And on this burden, the government has met its burden. We've designed a tax that will significantly increase social investment in the areas most impacted by the crisis. Beyond this, we have further defended our tax as bolstering social stability, as being fair, and helping deal with the most pressing issue of the affordability crisis, housing. We have dozens of programs at work right now. We have programs that have taken 32,000 people off the streets in renewing homes. We have Meals on Wheels. We have oil to heat pump affordability programs. There are programs that we can invest in right now that have been proven to work. That the money that we'll take from this tax can go into making home energy cheaper, housing affordable, food affordable. This crisis is serious. It is threatening to leave more people on the streets and steal away the Canadian dream from many of our friends, family, and neighbors. Maybe even you in the audience have begun to feel the pinch of rent, of mortgages, of bills. For you, this is a personal plight more than it will ever be a national crisis. This is not one story or a few, it is millions. It is the quarter of Canadians unable to cover an unexpected expense of $500. The 1/3 who will experience difficulty meeting their financial needs this year. This crisis demands action, and it demands new social investment. This is what our wealth tax does. I wish we didn't have to deal with this crisis. I wish we could live in their world where everything's so easily solved and you don't have to pay your hospital bill. But you do. We don't exist in voodoo economics, we exist in the real world. And we have to pay for this crisis, and the government here has put on our boots, and we're willing to do that with this wealth tax. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our student debaters. That was an extremely insightful and edifying debate. While we wait for the judges to do their deliberations and to announce the winners, we're going to hear from the UBCO's Associate Vice President of University Relations, Martin Youssef, who will share some thoughts on the importance of debate in today's climate. Before coming to UBCO, Martin was the Communications Director of TransLink, one of North America's leading transportation authorities. Before that, he worked for BC's Independent Investigations Office, where he championed community engagement and accountability. Martin also previously led the communications team for the United Nations Special Tribunal for Lebanon, the first international court prosecuting acts of terrorism. His career started in journalism, working on human rights and justice issues in Africa. Since coming to UBC, he has developed a great appreciation for academic discourse and the value of healthy debate. The floor is yours, Martin.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to start with a bold proposition that I'd like you to consider. Debate is the antidote to polarization. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm not talking about the kind of debate that happens on social media, specifically even around this very issue. When I say, or even the public debate that often gets called the public debate, which is basically one side arguing amongst themselves about the other side. When I say debate is the antidote to our polarization, I'm talking about this very thing that we have before us. It's structured, methodical, an opportunity to listen to different perspectives, to question, to rebut, and to defend. The genius of debate is in this particular structure. We have the luxury, of course, of living in the information age. But the downside to that is that we're drowning in information. And it's not just the quantity of information that's a problem, it's also the quality of information that is a huge challenge for us. And what does this do? This leads to noise. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that the past decade has been incredibly challenging in being able to decipher what truth really is. And if you think this past decade has been a challenge, we've not seen anything yet. I'm sure you've heard and read about the recent developments and advancements in artificial intelligence and the content and images that it has generated that stretches what truth really means. It's no exaggeration when I say this will truly transform humanity beyond anything that we've imagined, for good or bad. And because of all of this is overwhelming for most of us, what do? We retreat into our own groups, if you will. And we surround ourselves with people and ideas who are a mere image of who we are. And don't get me wrong, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Psychologists have a term for this called homophily, which is basically the fact that we are wired to like people who are like us. But the dangers of that is that we start to live in an echo chamber, in a bit of a bubble, and we're rarely exposed to intelligent counter ideas. And so we form an us and a them. Think about this. You know your news sources are biased, and yet you continue to go to them on a regular basis. And that's interesting how that works. And because we're not exposed to these counter ideas, we don't know how to deal with people who are different from us, especially when their views are different from us. We don't know how to intelligently call out false arguments, alarmist rhetorics, fallacies, and most especially when these views are held by us or groups in our own circles. And you know what happens next, of course? We go back into this echo chamber, we perpetuate that cycle, and then we have a more divisive and a polarized society. And that is fuel for fanaticism and extremism. Think, for example, about how we dealt with the COVID vaccine issue. Both sides of the issue lambasted each other in their own circles. But when we faced each other in the hallway or in the lunchroom, we talked about the weather, hockey, kids, anything but vaccines. How many of us have done that? And I won't ask you to put your hands up, don't worry about it. But you laugh, but it's a dangerous cycle. And often in the name of tolerance, we stay in our own ends of the spectrum. Don't get me wrong, tolerance is a hallmark of every successful society. But the basement of tolerance, or the crawl space of tolerance, is indifference at best and polarization at worst. And that's where we are today on so many different issues, because we don't often go to the structure that offers us this format to to deal with the most contested issues of our time. And the sad reality is that this polarization is actually very good for business. It's good for politics, it's good for social media, for algorithms, and dare I even say it's good for religion. I really believe that it is possible, and academic institutions like ours have a calling. It's to convene the contrasts. And I really believe that it is possible to debate the most contentious issues of our time, all without losing civility. But we must do this in a structured format like this, where we debate these tough ideas. And at UBC Okanagan, we believe in the power of debate to tackle some of the most contested issues that we have today. Our campus is positioned on the principles and values of bringing worlds together. And debate is just that, isn't it? It's the bringing of worlds and worldviews together. Shortly, you are going to have an announcement of the winner. But I'd like to propose something different. That despite the talent that we saw tonight, and there was a lot of it, the real winner here is you and I, is us. Because we're the ones that are leaving having heard different perspectives on a pretty tough topic. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is not an easy topic to deal with. I do urge you to resist the temptation to choose sides on this debate, because the gold standard of wisdom isn't how we hoard facts and well-crafted positions or stake our position in the sand on any particular issue. It's our ability to hold our convictions loosely, to be open to changing our minds if the facts call us to do that. So, our individual responsibility, yours and mine, in this polarized world, isn't to abandon our convictions, but to not let them define us. This is the difference between debate that advances society and a yelling match that polarizes us. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Leslie Cormack, our Principal and Deputy Vice Chancellor of UBCO, who will be announcing the winners of tonight's debate. Drawn to UBCO for its incredible combination of excellence in teaching and learning, discipline-changing research, and community partnerships locally and globally, Dr. Cormack has been providing leadership for UBC Okanagan since July 2020. Prior to joining UBCO, Dr. Cormack served as Dean of the Faculty of Arts from 2010 to 2020 at the University of Alberta. She also taught at the Department of History and Classics at U of A for 17 years and served as the Dean of Arts and Social Sciences at Simon Fraser University for several years. Dr. Cormack's scholarship focuses on the history of early modern science, particularly the geography and mathematics of 16th century England. She holds an academic appointment as Professor of History in the Irving K. Barber Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at UBCO, and earned both her PhD and Masters of Arts from the University of Toronto, where she studied history and the philosophy of science and technology. Would you please announce the winners for us, Dr. Cormack?
Thank you. So before I open this envelope, I think we need to give a round of applause to both of our teams. A hard-fought debate, one in which we saw a number of really inspiring riposts and points of view. I think it must have been very hard for the judges to make their final decision. That's why we had to wait for a little while. But I will stop wasting your time because I know you want to know what's in this envelope. The winners of the 10th Roger Watts Debate of 2023 is the government. Braden Gervais and Io Maxwell. Congratulations. And that means that the runners-up are our loyal opposition. So congratulations, Xanadu Gamage and Trinity Shredder. So thank you to all four of you This was an amazing evening. I think we have some certificates to hand out. And thank you all for coming. I think this really is one of those places where we can see the importance of education, the importance of thinking hard about a lot of really wicked problems that don't have one simple answer and really do benefit, as Martin said, from seeing all sides of the equation before we jump to conclusions, and hope we never jump to conclusions. So thank you very much.